Well, I want to give a hearty congratulations to you select few who weathered the storm to be here, whether you were coming from home or your dorm room. I am grateful to see all of you here tonight. I know often when you sign up for these things, it's a great idea because it's a perfectly beautiful day, and then a night like tonight comes and you still come out. So I say thank you to all of you sincerely for being here. In fact, I am feeling particularly filled with gratitude tonight because we're at the end of our fall speaker series. And so I want to take a couple moments just to offer some thank yous. I'm grateful, first and foremost, that after 2 years of disruption, we were able to come back together frequently and regularly this semester for events like the one tonight. And I'm grateful that there's, despite the rain, that kind of hunger for ideas and knowledge that you would still come out. So thank you. I'm grateful for the amazing team I have the pleasure to work alongside. My great colleagues, Teresa Haas, Aaron Berry, Katie Langford is somewhere around here, and Lindsay Smith, who's been a work study in our office for a couple of years now. You saw them at various points, either checking in or on your way in tonight. They're a terrific team, and they've got some incredible things planned for the spring of 2023. On the back of tonight's program, you can see what some of those are, and I hope that you'll be as excited about that as we are. But until then, can we get a nice round of applause for Aaron and Teresa and Lindsay and Katie for all that they do? Thank you. I'm also grateful for the great partnership that we've benefited from with the League of Women Voters of Newport County. I can't remember, is this the fifth event that we've done together in basically the last year and a half. And it's been a great partnership looking at threats to American democracy and what we as citizens all can do to help defend the republic. So thank you for your continued partnership, your leadership, and all that you do. I'd like to think that we're just getting started, and I look forward to the programs that are yet to come. Finally, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome to campus tonight a colleague who is an internationally recognized authority on digital and media literacy education. Dr. Renee Hobbs is founder and director of the Media Education Lab, an organization that is working to improve media literacy education through both research and community engagement. Their work is urgent and it's important, and we're thrilled that they're part of our community here tonight. Dr. Hobbs is also professor of communications studies at the Harrington School of Communications and Media at the University of Rhode Island, where she co-directs the URI Graduate Certificate in Digital Literacy. If that wasn't enough, Renee is also the founding co-editor of the Journal of Media Literacy Education and the author of 2 books, including Mind Over Media, Propaganda Education for Digital Age. Now, our plan is to be able to sell that book out in the lobby after the event tonight. Renee does not know this yet, so this is breaking news for her. It's not fake news, it's breaking news. The gentleman who operates our bookstore had his car die. So he's in the rain somewhere with a trunk full of your books. If he gets here, we will be selling them in the lobby afterwards. And if not afterwards, let me encourage you to go to Amazon. It's an important read. But without further ado, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome to the stage Dr. Renee Hobbs.
Wow. Thank you. We thought we'd have a conversation for a little while, and then maybe we'll play.
Let me get my mic going here. So, can folks hear us okay? Loud and clear in the back? Everybody's good? All right. So, Renee, it's a thrill to have you here. Thank you so much for taking time yourself to come out on a rainy night like tonight. We want to have a little bit of a conversation. We've got some interactive stuff that we're going to do with the audience as well. But to get us started, how did you first come to be interested in the study of propaganda?
Yeah. Well, I bet I encountered propaganda in school the way you might have when you were in school. When I was in high school, my high school English teacher taught us about things like glittering generalities, how to spot for messages that sounded really fancy but really didn't amount to much. We learned about the ad hominem attack, and everybody could recognize the get on the bandwagon appeal that was used by advertisers and politicians, and many of you probably learned about those concepts in high school. When I was poking around in an archive, I learned that those concepts that were being taught to me way back in the Stone Age in high school came from the 1930s. And that really ignited my journey of learning to understand, when did American teachers start teaching about propaganda? Why did they start teaching about it? And how did they do it? And so that really ignited my interest in propaganda education. And in 2007, I was invited by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum to help them with an exhibit called The State of Deception. It was about the history of Nazi propaganda. And the museum's challenge was how to build a connection between learning about Nazi propaganda and learning about the contemporary propaganda that's all around us. So since 2007, I've been proud and delighted to be able to collaborate with the museum on building connections between the past and the present. To tell you the truth, Jim, it still troubles me. Many of my students come to my class and say, oh, I'm really interested in learning about propaganda because I'm really interested in history. And I'm like, okay, but this is really going to be about contemporary propaganda. But most kids learn about propaganda in the context of learning about World War II, and that's all. That's the only time they encounter the concept.
And is the concept that they're exposed to, the concept of propaganda, inherently evil?
Yeah, that's it, of course. If the only way you learn about propaganda is the Nazis did it and 6 million Jews were murdered, then propaganda sounds dangerous as heck. But it turns out that propaganda is an absolutely essential component of democracy. It's baked into the democratic process. And over the years, the definitions of propaganda have changed in response to changing technologies, changes in culture, changes in society. So in 1946, propaganda was defined as how people are induced to work together. If you think about it, in the 1940s, propaganda as a way to unify a country around a shared cause, that concept was important. In the 80s, propaganda got a reputation for focusing on political machinations, right? And the sort of ways in which we did politics by slamming our opponents and by linking our guy to the apple pie in America. And then more recently, propaganda has been defined in relation to ethical issues, like the idea that a propagandist might be willing to use any means necessary to accomplish his or her objectives. But really, propaganda is human communication that's trying to change public opinion at a mass scale. So whenever you're reaching a mass audience and you're trying to influence their attitudes or behaviors, you might be engaging in propaganda.
We were talking a little bit before when you arrived tonight. We just taped an episode of Story in the Public Square today with Stacy Schiff, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian whose new biography of Samuel Adams, not Sam Adams, that's a beer, Samuel Adams, one of the founding fathers. I was frankly surprised to learn that he really was an incredibly effective propagandist. In fact, that's really what his contribution to the revolution was. But he was a practitioner of what I would call the dark arts. He was an early user of what I think today we would call fake news. And a lot of the things that he did really are not borne out by the historical record. Things that he claimed happened to indict the British in the minds of American public opinion never happened.
Yeah, so a true believer, he was willing to use any means necessary to communicate for his cause. And activists all over the world today do the same thing, right? It's really interesting to think about how propaganda can be found in journalism, in advertising, in government, but also in entertainment. And speaking of historically important propagandists, think about Harriet Beecher Stowe. She was a writer, but her passion for abolition made her a very, very effective propagandist. And she used entertainment to deliver a propaganda message. And so when you're watching movies or TV shows, you probably want to notice how propaganda still is, it's not designed as propaganda, but it has a propaganda function. And that's an important distinction, right? It's designed for entertainment. The movies I see on Netflix, the TV shows I see, it's designed for entertainment, but it can have a propaganda function.
And I'm pointing at my colleague Bill Lehman, because when we started Story in the Public Square, he's a great colleague in the history department. When we started Story in the Public Square, I asked some colleagues on campus to write essays about examples of stories that had shaped history. And he singled out Harriet Beecher Stowe and Uncle Tom's Cabin, which I think, if I'm quoting Bill quoting Lincoln, he met Harriet Beecher Stowe and said, "You're the little woman who wrote that little book that caused this great war." Right? And even more in contemporary, is it safe to think of advertising as a form of propaganda? We use so much of entertainment to sell stuff now. Is that a form of propaganda?
Advertising can be a form of propaganda because advertising isn't only designed to move merchandise, right? Yes, it does move merchandise, but it also influences our ideas about consumer culture more broadly. Communicating ideas that you have to have an identity, you have to have a product or a brand, or even just the support for capitalism itself is a form of propaganda that's baked into advertising. So sometimes in new media environments, we see sponsored content, right? That's the social media post. It fits in with everything else. It looks like what you see from your friends and family, but if you look closely, it's been promoted by a company. And often that isn't selling a product. It's communicating a set of values and a lifestyle that makes me want to drool, right? And so yes, it's serving a propaganda function by connecting a brand to a human need or a drive or an emotion. Propaganda does that really well.
So should when we hear something described as propaganda, should we instinctively get our hackles up? Should we be defensive and say, "Whoa, I don't want any of that"? Or America is supposed to be a good nation, we shouldn't be doing propaganda?
You know, it's such a great question. I've been paying a lot of attention to how the New York Times uses the term propaganda. They only use it in relation to Russia, China, and sometimes Donald Trump. That's it, right? It's never used for Greta Thunberg. Now, Greta Thunberg, I would argue, is one of the most powerful and effective environmental propagandists we have. And she started young. And she had a very effective way of communicating a very powerful message. And I think recognizing that propagandists come in many flavors also invites us to think about how propaganda can be beneficial or harmful depending on your point of view, right? Did you see the anti-mask PSAs, and did you see them as beneficial? Were they helpful to you?
The anti-masks?
Or the wear a mask?
The wear masks I thought were beneficial. The anti-mask, Facebook memes and things like that I thought were not beneficial.
Right. You know, one of the things that I often invite my students to do is to spot propaganda, is to pay attention to how does a media message activate strong emotions? How does it simplify information? How does it appeal to people's deepest hopes, fears, and dreams? And then how does propaganda sometimes attack opponents? Turns out in all the magic ingredients, propaganda doesn't work without us, right? We are a necessary ingredient, and only when propaganda taps into our deepest hopes, fears, and dreams will it be effective in changing our attitudes, our beliefs, and our behaviors?
So when we think about the social media platforms where Peter Singer, who's a pretty good theorist on these things, has said that if the platform is free for you to use, surprise, you're the commodity. You're what's being sold.
Yeah.
So as we all rush to our favorite social media flavor of the month, what role do we all play in the ubiquitousness of propaganda today?
Such a great question. You know, I think about how much entertainment is out there. Even my email is overwhelming, to tell you the truth. Right? I'm overwhelmed by my email, my Netflix, right? My Google. I'm overwhelmed by all the choices that I have. The thing that's scarce in an age that's so packed with choices for entertainment and information, the thing that's scarce is my human attention. I only have so much time and energy. So the scarce resource of human attention is the thing that's commodified in social media. And learning about the value of my attention is absolutely fascinating. I can actually go to Google and type in the phrase media literacy and find out that some people are willing to pay like $3 per click. If you click on the link media literacy, there's somebody out there who will pay $3 per click. And so that's the value of when I click, it's worth $3 to somebody. Think how many times you clicked today. And that's the attention economy that we live in.
The other thing that I find absolutely fascinating about social media in particular is that if you want to do paid advertising and you want to micro-target people based on values, political beliefs, their favorite dishwashing detergent, you can do that.
Yeah.
And the ability to target large numbers of people is really inexpensive.
Yeah. Really, really inexpensive. And did you know that you can do something called geofencing? You can set up an area around, say, a church, and you can say, I only want to deliver my advertising messages within 500 feet of this church, so that when you're checking your email, like before or after services, you're going to see messages that have been targeted just to you. People outside the 500 feet perimeter aren't going to see those ads, but inside the little gate, the geofence, you will see those messages. So when we talk about targeted, we mean that geographically at a very, very granular level. And I think most of us aren't really aware of the way in which people want to get into our heads and all the different reasons why people want to get into our heads. So the study of propaganda provides a really great opportunity to appreciate how do we make decisions about who we let into our heads.
There was a study published by the National Academies of Science, Proceedings of the National Academies of Science, looking at a study that was funded by Facebook, performed by psychological researchers at Cornell University, that basically Facebook ran a massive unwitting experiment on 800,000 users to see if emotional contagion, which is a well-documented and well-understood psychological phenomena, can take place on social media. So to put it in really simple terms, if you think about that difficult aunt who comes into your Thanksgiving dinner and wrecks the conversation for everybody. She's difficult, she's hard to listen to, and she changes the mood in the entire room. Facebook wanted to know if they were to manipulate the feed of stuff that you were receiving, would emotional contagion work? Would you be more depressed if they filled your Facebook feed with sad, depressing content from the people that you knew? Or would they be able to elevate your mood? And these folks at Cornell went in and did real language analysis to determine in your next post, were you up or down based on the feed that stuff you'd seen? And what they documented was that, yes, these social media platforms can affect not just what you believe, but your very mood.
Right.
Where are the ethics in this?
Well, you know, it's interesting. People make ethical decisions based on their goals. And Facebook's goals are to make money for their stakeholders. That, in fact, they're obligated.
Right.
They're
publicly traded company,
They're
yeah.
obligated to make money for their stakeholders. So what's interesting to me is that we're having this phenomenon right now around little laboratories of experimentation that are happening all over the country and all over the world. How should we regulate social media now that it has become the dominant media of our culture? What is the scope of oversight and responsibilities that are appropriate? And so part of propaganda education is understanding Section 230, the law that made the internet possible, and why it is. What's the difference between content moderation and censorship? And how are the European laws about the internet having an impact on us in North America? And what about what California is doing, developing its own regulatory tradition as the great big state that it is? So I think what's exciting and interesting is that one way we manage ethics is through regulation. We say, you got to balance your need for profit with the social good. And historically, that's been a really important function of regulation. So now we're having some experiments to see what kind of regulation of social media is going to help us achieve social good while still respecting the civil liberties and the freedoms of people who want to use social media for self-expression and communication.
Do you think that, as you mentioned the experiments taking place in Europe and in California, do you think that ultimately we're going to see some sort of federal regulation? Do you think the Federal Communications Commission regulates over-the-air broadcasts and have for, 70 or 80 years now? Do you think we'll get to some sort of similar regulatory model for internet communications, and should we?
Eventually, we will. We have a regulatory model in place now, right? And it gives lots of latitude to the private companies that own the media. You know that famous phrase, right? Freedom of the press belongs to those who own it. Will that shift depending on what kind of Congress we have, right? And what the public demand is for such regulation? I think that's really important. And I think that's why talking about what our expectations are for media platforms is really important. And it's part of the reason why the outrage over Elon Musk has been so visceral and so real as we go, okay, so what is the right form of social responsibility that we can expect from media companies?
So we want to have you talk a little bit about how you can help people analyze propaganda.
I did bring a handy dandy tool. I'd like to teach you how to use this tool. And if you're sitting next to someone, that would be great. If you're not, you could move and sit next to someone and make a new friend, or turn around to someone in front of you and behind you.
Is there anybody who still needs one of these?
I think everybody got one.
Okay.
So, you know, Jim, I developed this tool a long time ago. Back in the 1980s, when I first started doing media literacy in the Boston public schools, I would usually get about half an hour or 30, 40 minutes with teachers at the end of a very long day. Okay, Professor Hobbs is going to come in and explain what media literacy is. Oy. So I realized that a metaphor would be really important. So I'm going to teach you how to use the remote control, then we'll practice using it, okay? So you can see that the media literacy remote control can be used with any form of media. News media, websites, TV, movies, apps, podcasts, comics, books, music, social media, video games, anything. I want you to imagine what happens when you press the reality check button. Instantly comes flooding into your consciousness the answer to the question, what is accurate and inaccurate about this message? Press the private gain or public good button, and instantly comes flooding into your consciousness the answer to the question, who's making money from this message? Press the what's left out button, and you instantly understand what's omitted. And why is that so important? Understanding what's left out of a media message. It's the best way to spot the point of view of a media message. Remember I told you that the New York Times only uses the term propaganda to refer to Russia and China? Yeah. Well, I spotted the omission. They never use propaganda to refer to American politics, right? Or about corporate politics, or about activists and advocacy. They just never use the term. So noticing an omission is the best way to spot a point of view. Values check. Imagine that when you press this button, what comes flooding into your consciousness is the answer to the question, how does this media message align with my values? Today, because of social media, almost all the messages I encounter align with my values. Because I've programmed my digital devices to give me what I like. And sometimes I'm not even aware of what and how my values are limiting my exposure to the full range of ideas. So thinking about that is really powerful. Read between the lines. You know what, that's basic literacy, right? You can decode the symbols, but until you can make meaning, you aren't really reading between the lines. So recognizing the unspoken message, it's not said directly, but it's clear. That's reading between the lines. Now, stereotype alert, just think that blinking. Blinking, blinking, blinking. We saw it blinking during the last midterm election like crazy, right? Stereotype alert blinks whenever information about people or events or anything is radically oversimplified, distorting a message. Same with solutions too easy. We saw that in the midterms like crazy as well, didn't we? When something's so oversimplified that it makes it seem like it's really easy when we know there's a lot more complexity there. And then record save for later, that's my favorite button. If the guys at MIT could really make one of these for me to sell, I'd be a millionaire. Because we Americans, we really believe that the best way to solve your problems is to buy something, right? 4 easy payments, only $14.99. But the record save for later button is a way the most important, because that's the one that makes me ask, what's worth remembering? Of all the clicks that I clicked today, what's worth remembering? And you know, in this culture where we're scrolling, what's worth remembering? That is a habit of mind that takes practice to learn. And you have to do it intentionally, right? Otherwise, it just in and out, just like that. Okay, so now you've seen what the buttons are. On the back, you can see the critical questions, like who's the author and what's the purpose? What techniques are used to attract and hold your attention? What lifestyles, values, and points of view are represented? How might different people interpret the message? What is omitted? Give me a thumbs up if you're ready to use your remote control to analyze some propaganda. Come on, let me see. All right, that's good, let's go. There it is. For those of you who have difficulty reading from the back, it says, the ghost of Ukraine is the most beautiful thing in the world right now. The essence of democracy, freedom, and bravery. It must be supported in any possible way against the criminal Russian invaders. All right, get up here.
All right.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. Who's the author and what's the purpose?
I have no idea who the author is.
Okay, but?
But they are clearly trying to support Ukraine's war effort.
Okay. And you don't have any idea who the author is?
Specifically, no. My wager would be that it's someone who supports Ukraine. I can't speculate about their language mastery. I don't know if they're Ukrainian. I don't know if it's a false flag. It could even be somebody who's Russian. I just don't know.
We don't know anything, but we know their Twitter handle is ghost of.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What techniques are used to attract and hold your attention? Jim?
Well, so they're appealing to sort of some idealism with the Declaration, with the Statue of Liberty being
appeals to idealism.
Right.
Values check. Values check. Keep going.
They're also, I think, depicting the heroism of the Ukrainian foot soldier who's carrying a whole ton of anti-tank missiles, but also the courage of the Ukrainian president.
Courage, values check. Very, very good.
They're enmeshing Ukraine in the flag of the European Union, which would be, I'm not sure which one that is, but maybe reading between the lines, they're clearly suggesting that Ukraine either is or ought to be part of Europe.
Brilliant, brilliant. And doesn't Mr. Zelensky look like a heroic military leader? He's the president of the country, right?
Yeah.
But there he is depicted as the head of the troops, right?
Yeah.
Very close to them. So that value that the leaders are in front of and with the troops. Plus, it's super colorful, right? Just the sheer drama of those colors are really powerful. Now, we can't really tell who's the target audience, I guess Twitter users, but we have some clues who the target audience might be. Jim, what sense do you make of all of those icons next to the ghost of? What's going on with those icons? What do they mean to you?
Those are flags, and they're flags that, I need my Sheldon Cooper assist phone a friend for flags of the world, but those are a variety of different nations from across Europe. I think Africa and the European Union flag is up there, but so is the rainbow symbol, but so is the nuclear fallout symbol.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Of course, as a former English teacher, I am observant about the language being used here. I'm noticing the phrase criminal Russian invaders. That's a very strong negative phrase that makes me think the Ukrainians are the good guys and the criminal Russian invaders are the bad guys. And I also noticed this phrase, the most beautiful thing in the world right now. This idea that the whole world is supporting Ukraine. And that makes me hit the reality check button. Because would that it were true that the whole world is supporting Ukraine, but that is not the reality. But it's the reality that the propagandist wants to communicate, right? That's the vision or the dream of the propagandist, but it's not the reality. All right.
I'm just noticing too, so the essence of democracy, freedom, and bravery, the images on the left of the screen would be about democracy and freedom, and the images on the right are all about bravery. Right?
Oh,
So they've
nice.
reinforced the text with visual.
Bravo. So in real life, if we were doom scrolling, we would have looked at that for 3 seconds and moved on. But notice what happened when we slowed down to interact and engage, to share our different interpretations. Notice how much more we got out of this message. Notice how many questions it raises. Like, for me, this set of images raises questions about what's the meaning of this image here, which to me looks like a little bit Statue of Liberty-esque, right? And it makes me want to know what's going on in that image, right? The Ukraine flag is being draped around. Did that really happen? Did the Statue of Liberty get draped in the Ukrainian flag? And so I want to go Google that and see, when did they do that, right? So I can activate intellectual curiosity that makes me want to learn more. That's what happens when you slow down and do a media literacy analysis using the smartphone. You guys ready to look at another one? Now this one, Jim and I did all the work and you just watched us. That's no fun. So what we'd like you to do is we'd like you to work with the person sitting next to you. We're going to give you 5 minutes to talk amongst yourself with a partner. If you're sitting alone, you'll be very lonely. So Find a person to talk to. We're going to show you another propaganda message. We want you to talk it over. Ready? There it is. You have 5 minutes to discuss. Use your remote control to have a structured conversation.
Biolabs.
But you see the audience turning their heads like this.
You got to really spin that wheel. Yeah, in that first slide. Yeah, you feel good? In that first slide, the colors being draped over the Statue of Liberty are upside down if it's the Ukrainian flag. Because the yellow should be on the bottom. Isn't that interesting?
So where'd that go?
Yeah. And what were they doing?
You have 1 minute remaining. 1 minute. Can we take audience participation?
Sure. Yep, we can.
Do we have a microphone here? Or
We've got some microphones.
We got some microphones around the
Looking for
rooms?
Teresa, who will tell me where the microphones
Or
are.
maybe we'll ask people to shout loud.
We'll have a microphone come to you.
Okay, here's the idea. We'd like to hear 3 observations. They might be small ones. They might be interesting ones. They might be things that came up in your conversation as you used the remote control to interpret and analyze this piece of propaganda. I'll hear from 3 of you. Raise your hand. The microphone will come to you. What did you notice? What was noteworthy? Your attention.
Right down here. Microphone's coming to you.
Well, it's called the Putin wheel, and it certainly seemed to convey all of the language used by Putin, that it's a special military operation. It's going to protect the people of Donbass. The denazification of Ukraine, we heard that early on as a phrase used by Putin. All of these seem to be his points of view. But we were also trying to figure out, well, what is the point of view of the person presenting it? Are they pro-Putin, or is this a way of sort of holding this up as a ridiculous, all of the ridiculous notions that Putin has? Is it satirizing him? So what are biolabs? I haven't heard of that. That would be a reality check, or something I'd want to know more about. I hadn't heard anything about Putin, Ukraine's biolabs as a reason for this. So those were some of the things.
Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate your observation that these statements are statements Putin made, but you're aware that the author of this message is probably not in agreement with Putin on this. That's a very who's that? Wheel, what came up? What was noteworthy? What did you notice? I'm here for 2 more people.
I just felt like it made it seem like the whole thing's a game, and I kind of resent that part of it.
Hi. Sharon.
So
the values check button is working for you. They're trivializing an absolutely important issue. It seems silly and important, and lives are being lost. So you're pointing out the values gap between what this message is saying and how you understand the war. Thank you for sharing. We'll hear from one more person.
Before we go, Teresa, I think it might be Renee's microphone.
Oh, is it my microphone? What is my microphone doing? Is it making all kinds of weird noises?
It's that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Sounded like someone was having fun with styrofoam. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm waiting for my third person. Maybe it's somebody up in the back row. What did you notice about this propaganda? What was noteworthy, curious, problematic? I see you wanting to share something, please.
Microphone's coming.
Oh, there she is.
I have two observations, one of which is interesting. That noise going on there caused a total distraction and defeated the purpose of the propaganda, let's say. It's been interesting how he shut it off by just making a crazy noise like that. Secondly, at least from here, it's almost impossible to read it.
Right.
You know, if you could rotate the thing, but I'm not the only one who can't read it. I know back there they can't read any of it.
Yeah. And maybe the point isn't what is on there, just the idea that it changes, right? So maybe you don't need to be able to read it to get the read between the lines message. Very, very nice. And I think you had your hand raised as well. Just a little bit down. Yeah.
Ma'am? No?
This will be the last one. Oh.
We're good?
All right. So I guess maybe what I'd like to do is share with you, Jim, a little bit about what we've created at the Media Education Lab to try to deal with this. It's possible that you've seen little blurbs like this on your social media feed, and we could critically analyze this one too. But we could also go to the ad transparency library at Google. And one of the things that's really cool is that in the United States, since 2018, after we learned that Russians interfered in our elections, social media platforms mandate political ad transparency. So this one right here, created by the NRA, they only spent $2,000 or $2,500, and they reached 700,000 people with this propaganda, right? And this ad, if you clicked on it, you'd go to the NRA website, right? And it would give you a little survey, right? And tell you how important gun ownership was and how the Democrats are coming after your guns. They're confiscating them. But the idea is that most of the time, this is just background in your scroll. You're not paying attention to it. It's just there. Or here's another one. Was Ginny Thomas involved in January 6th? Click here, and what happens? Well, this one's really peculiar. It was created by, according to the Google Political Ad Library, it was created by the Free Citizens Network. This is a dark money front. I could find no 990 or anything on them. They say they're a 501c3 charitable educational operation, but there's no contact information. There's nothing. Really hard to figure out who they are. They spent only $300 on this, and they got 250,000 views, right? So understanding how we now have some tools to kind of, I guess what I would say is like pull back the curtain to reveal that, you know, the great and powerful Oz is just a guy with a machine putting up sounds and images and symbols to try to get you to think, feel, and do something. So we should use the tools that are available to us. That tool, when you go to it, says that since 2018, like $1 trillion was spent on Google advertising, right? 732,000 political ads in just the last 3 years. And in Rhode Island, they spent almost $2 million on ads since 2018, right? So our tiny little state's getting our fair share of ads coming through your Google search engine. Of course, the biggest spenders are the presidential candidates. You can see some of the dollars that are revealed. Every day this data changes, so that's kind of cool. It's dynamic content. And it even has the positive propaganda that we have to recognize is part of our political discourse, right? We use propaganda to elect candidates, but we also use propaganda to get people to COVID treatment, right? And it's not just the government who gives that kind of propaganda. We ordinary people are creating propaganda too, right? As in this meme that suggests how ridiculous it is to refuse vaccines when they're available, right? Making fun of the idea that you should choose not to get vaccinated. This one wasn't created by a government. It was created by an ordinary person who went to the meme generator and did tweak, 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 and 3 seconds later created a cool meme. So propaganda isn't just coming from governments. It's coming horizontally across all of our friends, colleagues, and others. Now, this is what happens when my students hear me talk about beneficial propaganda. Because remember, they grew up thinking that the only propaganda that existed was in Nazi Germany in the 20th century. And so this idea that propaganda might be beneficial makes kids crazy. I asked my students to make memes about what they were learning. And so every other week, they had to create memes to represent what they were learning. Here is, I'm going to share you another one. Some of those are here at my website, the Mind Over Media Gallery. I want to show you a feature of this gallery that's really cool. I created this with the Holocaust Museum back in 2012. We wanted to have a place to put examples of contemporary propaganda so that teachers could make connections between the past and the present, and so that you didn't have to go trawl the whole internet to find a teachable artifact that would be good for a high school class or a college class. It's a crowdsourced gallery, so what that means is that anybody from anywhere in the world can upload a piece of media content that they think is propaganda. And Jim, there's stuff on this site that I don't think is propaganda. I see it as news, right? But somebody thinks it's propaganda. And so what's cool when you go to the website is you can scroll or search. You can search by country or topic. You could type in NRA or guns or abortion or any topic and find propaganda on that topic. But here's what happens when you get there. You get to this website, and I know you all saw this propaganda, because if you had a pulse, you got exposed to some political campaign advertising. This was Seth Magaziner at the very end of the campaign running an attack ad. We aren't going to look at it, but notice what you're asked to do at this website. Rate this example from beneficial to harmful. So you watch the video, Seth Magaziner for Congress, and now you're asked to rate on a 5-point scale. Is it harmful or beneficial? Once you do, you see how other people who visited the website rated that site. And we see that nobody thought it was really beneficial. 64% said it was somewhat beneficial. 16% were kind of on the fence. 4% thought it was like a bit harmful, and 16% thought it was very harmful. Whoa. Now this creates an interesting opportunity for me. It disrupts me from my little bubble, because I thought this was a perfectly beneficial ad. I think political advertising is important for the political process. But now I have to wonder, like, somebody who thought it was harmful, like, what reasons might they have? Maybe they just didn't like Seth Magaziner, right? But there might be other reasons why some people think this kind of political advertising has harmful and corrosive ideas. So I'm opened up to this idea that my interpretation isn't the only possible interpretation. Here's another example. Oh, here's what the person who posted it had to say about it. The person who posted it said, this was an ad attacking Alan Fung for supposedly wanting to appoint Kevin McCarthy as the head of the House of Reps, who supposedly wants to cut Social Security and Medicare. Though the source cited does not say him specifically, it also says Fung is against lowering prescription drug costs. Thought the technique used was to attack opponents. Thought this was going to help people not vote for Fung. Here's another one. This one's really curious. It reads, by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, we could disrupt those communities and vilify them on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Credited to Nixon counsel John Ehrlichman. Whoa, this is quite a piece of propaganda. What does it mean? Is this beneficial or harmful? Well, it's all over the map. Some people say this is really beneficial. Other people think this is harmful. This is a really complex text. The person who posted it said, this piece of propaganda uses a quote from the 1970s to make a comment on the racial targeting and vilification of minorities as a political strategy for winning elections. It's not designed to appeal to people who are familiar with the legacy of the Nixon administration. And it compares Nixon and Trump. This is an attack ad that appeals to those who are concerned about racial inequalities. It describes a propaganda technique of creating us versus them frameworks as a political ploy. Wow. So I hope I've given you this idea that it's really exciting to study contemporary propaganda and notice how it activates strong emotions, how it relates to audience needs, and how it simplifies information. And when we start to appreciate the possible harms of propaganda is especially when it attacks opponents. And when it attacks opponents, when it vilifies and frames up an us versus them narrative, our solutions to easy buzzers should be blinking, because some of the most dangerous propaganda creates those us versus them narratives that are really and truly dangerous. And it's my motivation for teaching propaganda is in part because we have to be on guard for that. And sometimes we're vulnerable to that. So if you go to the Mind Over Media website, you can access some free online learning resources that I've created to teach about propaganda to high school and college students. It turns out it's a rich and complicated topic. It's a shame that it only often is paid attention to for just one class period in one English department in 1 year. Propaganda and the persuasive genres should be a much bigger part of how we engage in teaching students about language and literacy and about the political process and about how we try to influence each other through the power of symbols. So propaganda education needs to be a part of what Rhode Island students get a chance to do when they're in middle school and they're in high school. But that'll only happen if we expect it to, if we demand that it does, and if we do it ourselves, if we engage in our own propaganda education.
Renee, I know we're going to take some questions from the audience in just a second. I know that you've got a new project that actually speaks to some of this. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I'm so excited about this project and hoping that people in this audience will come on the journey with us. We were thrilled this October when we learned that our proposal to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security was granted. And we got a $700,000 grant to develop a statewide media literacy initiative designed to depolarize Rhode Island. And by that I mean to address the real imminent risks of targeted violence, like we saw at Club Q, like we saw in the Walmart. The reality of it is no government agency can be the eyes and ears and find and solve this problem. It takes all of us. And part of that is for us to notice how that pyramid of hate actually works, you know? Long before you pick up an AK-15 and walk into a Walmart, it starts with having hateful thoughts, hateful speech, hateful actions, right? And then for a very small number of people and under only certain circumstances that we don't fully understand, it turns to action. What if the eyes and ears of all Rhode Islanders could help us address the polarization and us versus them framing that happens in ordinary talk around the dinner table, in our communities, in our classrooms, in our workplaces? And what if we could find ways to depolarize through talking about media and taking time to analyze media and thinking about the way in which conflict is part of the attention economy, right? Where we're invited to pay attention to conflict entrepreneurs, right? Who use anti-Semitic remarks to get attention, get free media attention. Once we start able to recognize how conflict entrepreneurs are pushing us toward polarization, we can depolarize. And maybe you'll want to join us. It's going to be really cool. There'll be online dialogues, there'll be a curriculum and opportunities for teacher training, and then there'll be a statewide youth media contest. Woohoo!
This sounds fantastic. Let's open it up to some questions from the audience. Again, there's microphones that will not sound like styrofoam. Raise your hand. And if you've got a question for Dr. Hobbs,
Question
she'd
or
be happy to
comment?
answer it. One in the back.
Does this work? Okay. So when you talked about the difference between censorship and regulation, something that I've been noticing lately through TikTok, how it's a Chinese company owned by ByteDance, is that their version for that they market to the Chinese is of course different than the Western version, the American version. So how is it that the U.S. government should deal with that issue, and what's the difference in that scenario between regulation, or I know it's been brought up in the past of like banning TikTok, more so that would be censorship. What's the difference between that and a situation, an issue like that for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm really glad that you're attentive to, again, it shows your great media literacy competencies that you're aware TikTok has an owner, a corporation that's behind it, and recognizing who owns media is part of asking that question, who's the author and what's the purpose, right? And another thing that I appreciated about your comment is that you recognize that it turns out that there is no easy solution, right? It's probably going to be a really complicated solution because we're pretty committed to a global economy. We're pretty committed to this idea that people from anywhere in the world should be able to make cool things that we can share with others, right? We're not going to go back from that, right? I hope not, anyway. I really appreciate having the greatest achievements and creative energies of people around the world benefiting me intellectually and also in material goods and every other way. So there'll be an opportunity for us to talk through a solution, and TikTok users should be at the forefront of that because you know the platform best, and you also recognize some of its benefits and harms. That's a great opportunity for advocacy within the creators and the users of the TikTok community. Help us figure out the appropriate kind of regulation that maximizes the creative potential of that great medium and minimizes its potential harms.
Other questions? Down here. Microphone is coming.
I don't have my voice is not normally like this, but question on, you talked about in the EU and they have some regulations, a lot on privacy versus profit, and maybe you could just talk a little bit about that and some of your thoughts them versus bringing that to the U.S.?
Yeah, one of the things that's fascinating to me is, of course, my friends in Germany explain how hate speech is criminalized, right? And in the United States, we have this very long tradition of tolerating hate speech. It goes all the way back to the Enlightenment. It goes all the way back to the founding of this country, and the values behind the First Amendment go something like this. Even the most false and hateful message can have value to people who are using it to find the truth. Even a false and dangerous message can have some value. And I think we're in a place right now with the internet having kind of broken down all the gatekeepers and made any kind of speech possible. Was we're walking back on that, we're rethinking that. Is that really true? Just because that seemed like a good idea in 1800, do we still think it's the wisest course of action? And I feel like in Europe, they don't have as robust a First Amendment tradition as we do. And they also have this sense of the role of the state to take care of its citizens, protect its citizens. So Germany's laws are in the best interest of the German citizens as they see it. This is a law that is helpful and protecting. In our country, we couldn't have such a law. It would be unconstitutional. So I think there's, again, a place right there for the need for us to talk a little bit about what are the costs and benefits of our First Amendment tradition, and how do we hold on to our civil liberties and our freedoms while we need to protect our societies from the most egregious hate, the most destructive kinds of images. That's a very exciting and important discourse. I don't think it's going to be solved by technocrats or politicians, Jim. I think that's a discussion that has to happen amongst us, the American public. I think we're having that discussion, sort of. And another reason for the media literacy remote control being so powerful is we slow down the media to actually look at it and talk about it. So then we can come to consensus about this should be off limits, this should be okay. And that through that consensus will emerge through dialogue.
So I'm going to take the opportunity to ask you one final question. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of media education literacy, and why?
Oh, but you have to see how optimistic I am, right? The older I get, the more optimistic I get because I've seen the progress that's happened in the last 40 years. When I started this work, it was like media and literacy didn't belong in the same phrase. What are you talking about? Media has nothing to do with literacy. But now, English teachers everywhere, not just in the United States, but all over the world, they use the term text. They say literacy is the sharing of meaning through symbols. Sometimes the symbols are the little black squiggles on the white page. Sometimes the symbols are the photos that we share with our phone. Sometimes they're the text messages. Sometimes they're the memes. But if we're sharing meaning through symbols, then almost any kind of text you can imagine, a documentary, a YouTube influencer, a social media post, you name it, is worth unpacking to see how does it mean, what features of it make it meaningful. And so English teachers everywhere have redefined what counts as a text. And that's a big shift in our thinking about the nature of literacy. So I'm pretty convinced that, God willing, by the time I die, we won't even need to use the word media literacy. We'll just use the word literacy, and we'll understand that literacy means the ability to read all the different kinds of texts that are out there, visual texts, games, right? TikTok videos, and we'll understand that to write means not just to write an academic essay, but to be an activist, to give a great speech, to design a powerful, persuasive political campaign. And being a reader and a writer in an information age, I feel like that's the essence of what literacy is, and it's also why literacy is the foundation of democracy, why we need a literate society to have a democratic self-governance.
That's a great place to leave it. She's Dr. Renee Hobbs. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for coming out in the rain.
Please be safe going home. Do we have books for sale? We have books for sale in the foyer, in the lobby if you're interested. I know that Renee would be happy to sign, and I wish you all a happy holiday.